So about the JCPOA then, which I'm absolutely loathed it, but from my understanding, the approach and sort of blueprint that the US administration had for a new one was essentially the same, just re-engineered in slightly technical areas. And it reminds me of the NAFTA agreement when he basically just created the same thing, but just put USA at the front and changed the name.
He'll say that if it wasn't for me getting out of the JCPOA, they would already have had a nuclear weapon, which is the literal exact opposite of the case. It's only because he got out in 2018 that started the countdown that led to this series of wars we had last year and the one we're in right now. So by getting out of it, we gave them every incentive to increase their stockpile. And they said at every level publicly, as recently as 2021, we are now up to 60% enrichment because you have attacked our facilities. That's the reality. But President Trump, because that's not what he wants to hear, he'll just ignore all those things and then have something with no substantiation at all claim they would have a nuclear bomb if he hadn't gotten out of there.
This is the Global Gambit.
Welcome back to the Global Gambit, everyone. My name is Pyotr. I am your host. And today my guest is Colonel Daniel Davis, who is a retired member of the US Army and a fellow YouTuber, Colonel. But it's lovely to be doing this with you. I was very keen to have you on for a long time. Now, you've been following this, covering this extensively, but obviously in the past 24 hours, we've had a lot of developments around the idea of peace, de-escalation, or as some people have called it, repositioning. Where do you stand on things right now?
I just think that based on recent history and on military deployments, I think that this is just basically the third consecutive iteration where the U.S. says we're talking diplomatic, we're talking peace, but we're just waiting for military preparations to be in order. And I expect that you're going to see something with the 82nd Airborne or the Marines or maybe even some special forces from the U.S. Army, which are apparently in the region. And because I don't see any possibility that any of these negotiations, at least what's being publicly said by President Trump in light of now I guess we're in the 25th day of this war, there's no reason for why Iran would be willing to have any concessions now when everything they have offered before has been literally shot down from their hands. So I think that really when you look down to it, everything is lining up for some kind of an operation this weekend, whether that's making good on his initial claim that he's going to hit energy sources inside of Iran, if it's going to be a combination of a strike on some of their facilities and some sort of ground operation or one or the other. It's unclear, but all I see preparation wise is the likelihood of some kind of military action this weekend.
Now, you mentioned the 2nd Airborne. Can you explain to us non-military experts what that is, who they are, why it's a significant development, and what influence it could have over the coming days?
Yeah, the 82nd Airborne has a ready brigade, they call it, which is ready to go anywhere in the world within 96 hours with no alert. So that they always have at least one brigade of the three brigades that make up the 82nd Airborne that can basically just say, they ring a bell, they jump, get in their gear, run to a plane, and then they fly somewhere, and then they're ready to go shortly thereafter. And so to put them on orders, now this you may have seen here a week or so ago, they had an exercise scheduled, which was abruptly canceled, and many people were speculating that they may be getting ready to go here. Now, sure enough, that is the case. It's now been officially confirmed by the division commander that a full brigade of the Ready Brigade is being deployed to the Middle East. Of course, that's all they're saying right now, but that's something that can go into action really quick. But that comes at a trade-off. To be able to go that fast means you're also going that light because you don't have a lot of equipment to carry. You don't have a lot of logistics, so that whatever you can do, you can get there fast, and whatever ammunition and weapons you have with you, you can do, some light tasks. You can't do anything heavy, but you can do it light. But then you also have to either be extracted quickly or you've got to be reinforced. It's kind of the classic deal that you want to, like Operation Market Garden, for those who may be familiar with World War II history, where a lot of airborne troops were dropped in deep inside the German-held territory, and armor was supposed to drive up fast to meet them. They didn't meet up fast to meet them, and it turns out that they ended up getting heavy casualties and having to withdraw. So there's a big risk if you don't have the sustainment that can come behind and do that. And we have a similar situation here to whatever you would do inside of Iran. The only way you can support it and keep it supplied is through the air, and that means either V-22 tilt rotor attack craft, Chinook, or maybe several other different kinds of transport helicopters, but all of them are very vulnerable, even to rifle fire, much less anti-aircraft fire, shoulder-launched missiles. All kinds of things can knock those out there. So just getting to the target area, whatever that may be, one would imagine it's somewhere along the Iranian coast, whether that's Karg Island or some of those islands in the bend of the horseshoe of the Strait of Hormuz. It's going to be just really hard getting in because everybody on the world knows that those are the potential targets. So Iran definitely has some kind of capability and plan to interdict anything coming in there. And then you have the issue, even if you successfully get on there with whatever level of casualties you may suffer, how are you going to keep it sustained? What are you going to do if guys get wounded on the island? How are you going to get them medevaced off? Because every single time you fly another helicopter out to pick up a wounded, you run the risk of having the thing shot down on the way in and on the way out. And all you got to do is look at a map, and any entry point you want to use has significant areas flying over open water, which means it can be tracked. And according to what we've been told right now by both the Iranians and several others, is they're getting targeting information and intelligence from both Russia and China. So even whatever their own have, and of course they've got plenty of reconnaissance drones of their own, the Iranians do, so they have plenty of opportunity to track. And we've been seeing that they've been hitting a lot of very pinpoint targets throughout the entire Gulf region. So the idea that they wouldn't know something's coming or wouldn't be able to hit it seems pretty loaded.
It doesn't sound in any way logical or a rational thing to do. Like, what exactly are they supposed to do there, Colonel? Like, how many troops is it? 3,000, 4,000? And then
there's exactly 3,000 in the second, and then there's around 5,000 total Marines in the two Marine Expeditionary Units that are, I guess the Tripoli will be in operation ready to go Friday, and the USS Boxer Group will show up a week or 10 days later, something like that. So it's not very many. And yeah, from a military perspective, this is driving me crazy because I'm like 93 million people in the country of Iraq. It's 4 times bigger than the country of Iraq. And that's not even the biggest issue because the entire western half of the country is these really rugged mountains of the kind that I saw when I participated in 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan and spent a lot of times out in those mountains. And I know how difficult that is to have any kind of military operation. And it gives every advantage in the world to the defenders. So even if you want to say the U.S. military is, by far superior in training and capability and everything else over the Iranian side, all of those benefits that we have are sacrificed because they have the habit of, or the benefit of defending their own territory, and the terrain strongly favors the defense, and they will have had this stuff prepared for a long time. It's not like they never figured this out before. So I don't understand why anyone in the United States would order such an operation, what they think they would accomplish, even if they got some terrain, whether it's Karg or the island there in the horseshoe bend of the strait. I just don't understand what the benefit would be, but I can sure see a lot of negatives because if this fails, whatever you think you're going to show a show of strength to be able to show you can do something, if it fails, you're going to undermine people's credibility and respect for the United States military, and it's going to dramatically increase the stability of the Iranian side, steal their backbones, and make them hold out even more. This is a huge gamble. It's not even a risk in my view, with very little to gain and a whole lot to lose.
So is it a case of Trump's just changing his mind? I was on the news yesterday and made this point that Trump's talking to the Iranians. We've got talks, and then suddenly the Iranian Speaker of Parliament or whatever says, no, we haven't had that. I mean, I don't know. The Iranians lied about the missiles and their range capabilities, right? Targeting Diego Garcia, but like, who's telling the truth here? Or are they both smoke and mirrors? There are talks going on, but Trump's doing that thing of building up the military pressure whilst exploring diplomatic options.
Well, I think that some version of that is going on, though I will say with that issue with the long-range missiles, just keep me in the skeptical camp because I don't believe anybody here. If I don't see physical evidence or if I don't see, video of something that's coming in, I'm skeptical of it because I know that's the claim. But so far, our side has not provided any video evidence, no wreckage of the thing. We just claimed that they did. I don't know why they're only going to fire 2 missiles and that's it. I don't see what the gain would have been from that. They denied having done it. I don't know why they would do that if they actually did it, because they sure took credit for the other missiles that they fired in the region. But then again, they have said some things that turned out to be true. I mean, von Clausewitz talked about deception is at the heart of all military operations. So you can count that both sides will probably ordinarily will tell some version of the truth, and then they'll put other things in there to deceive the enemy, etc. So you just can't take anything, and I mean from anybody, at face value. But you do have to listen, because there is some elements of truth, and then you got to match it up and marry it up with what you can see on the ground, and then what you know from military history and capabilities of where things could go next. And that is one of my problems here, because from the American side, you say, well, we probably wouldn't do something that doesn't make any sense. But then again, this war didn't make any sense either, because it was self-evident from the beginning that the chances of causing the Iranian side to collapse because the leader was assassinated, you hadn't been paying attention to anything they'd been saying or doing in the decades prior to this. Look at their ability, the fact that they decentralized their military, so they didn't have, you cut off the head and everything else dies. They have that avoided. So they have it decentralized into 31 different military regions. They have, they said this beforehand, that they had several orders of magnitude of people ready to take the place. If somebody that falls, somebody else is already designated, they would fall in behind that, and so forth. And so far, everything they have said that they would do, they have done. And so now when they say that President Trump, if he keeps to his ultimatum threat and attacks Iranian energy, I think that we can count on that they'll be telling the truth, that they will attack desalination plants and other energy infrastructure throughout the region in retaliation for this. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't do that. There's no motivation for them to withhold it, because they wanted a negotiation. They wanted this thing to end, and they had one literally on a golden plate for Trump prior to this, on the 26th of February, the last negotiation with Steve Witkoff, and we just discarded that and chose war anyway. That didn't make any sense, because President Trump had this golden opportunity in his hand, not just to avoid the war, but to come out with a genuine, and I mean significant, diplomatic success. This would have helped him in his midterms, because he could have said, I got something that even Obama couldn't get, because they were willing to go to 0% enrichment to prove they didn't have a bomb, allow American inspectors, a number of things that the JCPOA from 2015 didn't include. Trump threw all that away. So now then, along with doing that, not only was that the second straight time that we went to war with Iran after claiming we were in diplomatic opportunities, not only did he throw away a golden opportunity to avoid any destruction from anyone in the region, much less the, I think, 240 Americans who have been wounded and the 13 so far that we know of killed, but it also would have given him an opportunity to bolster his credibility throughout the region and left us in charge and the Strait open and the price of oil low. None of those things are the case now. And so when we hear this, evidence that we may be thinking of doing something else that doesn't make any sense, I fear that Trump is listening to too many of these voices that says you are the greatest military power in the history of the world. You can do anything. Look at Venezuela. Unfortunately, I hear a lot of people making a comparison. Look what we did there. We got the leader out that we wanted. We got a compliant country in the backside. Now we have control of their oil. We can do the same thing to Iran. And now then, we'll show you me business. We're going to take one of these islands and we're going to get control. Maybe it's carved because of this, it's 90% of their production offloading capability. And then we'll show them we mean business, and then they'll give up. People may believe that, in Washington, D.C., that are listening to Trump. And one of my sources tells me here recently that President Trump basically blocks anyone in his inner circle that doesn't tell him what he wants to hear. And so that means the only people are telling him is exactly what he wants to hear, and he is apparently acting on it. So I am very worried that even though I can tell you militarily 100 reasons why any kind of ground operation anywhere has almost no chance of success and a high probability of failure, they still might do it.
Absolutely. So about the JCPOA then, this has obviously been a deal that was heavily criticized for being too lenient and not achieving anything. Trump absolutely loathed it. But from my understanding, the approach and sort of blueprint that the US administration had for a new one was essentially the same, just re-engineered in slightly technical areas. And it reminds me of the NAFTA agreement, when he basically just created the same thing but just put USA at the front and changed the name. I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but is there a little bit more to this deal?
No, there's not, unfortunately. And there's just, I mean, man, you talk about not being able to take anything at face value. Hardly anything that comes out of the White House you can take at face value. I mean, just look at this whole, the way this recent dynamic has. You had on March 20th, President Trump Truth Socialed out that this is all but one. Basically, it's already over. There's just a little bit of problem in the strait, but it doesn't bother us because we're not going to worry about it. Those people who use it, they're going to have to figure it out. Then the next day, the 21st, 48 hours, or we're going to destroy everybody. The next day, on the 22nd, he says, well, Iran lost. And now all I got to worry about is the domestic problems here at home. And then the next day, yesterday, now then, okay, we're going to give 5 more days into this. You see, it's just all over the place. So nobody knows exactly what he's going to do. So when he says he wants a negotiated settlement, he had it in his hand, as I said a second ago, golden, better than the JCPOA. And then he will perversely, weirdly say this, and this is prior to yesterday, he'll say that if it wasn't for me getting out of the JCPOA, they would already have had a nuclear weapon, which is the literal exact opposite of the case. It's only because he got out in 2018 that started the countdown that led to this series of wars we had last year and the one we're in right now, because otherwise they would have still been inside of it with, I think, 3.67% enrichment, that they would only have had a very small amount they could have stockpiled. It was a very minuscule amount. There was all these international inspectors. There was the IAEA inspectors, et cetera. There was other guarantors, and they were largely operating within it for the 3 years that it was in effect. And any times they were allegedly cheating, every time it was exposed, they would go back. But generally, by and large, they kept to it. And if we had stayed with that, they would still be in it. When the sunset came up in 2015, they had every incentive to roll it over into something new. And the idea that, well, then they would have raced to the bomb, that's counterintuitive, because then they would have chosen to have all these sanctions put back on them in the event that it stayed where it was. And they wouldn't have done that. That's against their self-interest, because the reason they agreed to it at all is because they wanted to get sanctions relief, because they wanted to have a normal country. So by getting out of it, we gave them every incentive to increase their stockpile. And they said at every level publicly, as recently as 2021, we are now up to 60% enrichment because you have attacked our facilities. But if you'll go back to the JCPOA, we will also go back into it. That's the reality. But President Trump, because that's not what he wants to hear, he'll just ignore all those things and then have something with no substantiation at all claim they would have a nuclear bomb if he hadn't have gotten out of there. And it doesn't take much experience to figure that's not the truth. Now then you hear that he says he wants a negotiation here, and then you hear yet Senator Ron Johnson the other day. He said all they had to do was just say that they're not going to have a nuclear bomb, but they wouldn't do it. And that is exactly what they have done. So you see a total disconnect from what the Iranian side is saying and doing and what we're saying and doing. So that's one of the reasons why I don't have any hope that this current round of negotiations will accomplish anything, because, quite frankly, the Iranian side would be fools to act on anything in good faith that the U.S. says right now with this track record from 2018 I just described.
Yeah, I just on that point, actually, I'm just reading here some of the latest updates, and there's not really any confidence. I had hoped that this might draw down just because then I could have a sort of sense of normality again and then get a good night's sleep. But
that day.
Yeah, you and me both, right? But no, one person, a lot of people just think Trump's buying time as they prepare for this new phase, right? Boots on the ground. But just to expand on this point a little bit and get your take on it, is simply the US public has no appetite for this conflict. Specifically, they have no appetite, definitely, for boots on the ground. I think there's like 7% of Americans overall have any support for a big ground operation, whilst I think maybe 15%, pretty clearly not on board with a limited ground operation. So maybe the air and airborne or a troop number of 10,000 people. Is Trump trying to buy time? And if so, is it for a ground operation? How much can that really make a difference?
Well, it can't. This is like I said. I mean, you're talking. I mean, if it was the entirety of the Rapid Reaction Force from the 82nd, it's like around 3,000 troops. And if it was the entirety of all the Marines, and a lot of those are support and people on the ship, so it's maybe 4,000 actually combat Marines. It's a tiny dot on the map. It's not going to accomplish anything at all. And unfortunately, you talk about some of those polls. At least one of the ones I saw is that the MAGA Republicans, I think 55% said that they would support a limited ground operation with some kind of limited objectives or something, which is nuts because it should be about 10%. Because even if you don't know anything about combat, you should understand the history and just look at a map and you can see this massive country, and that some small operation just isn't going to accomplish anything. But unfortunately, there's very little understanding in the population or in the government, apparently, that has an understanding of what combat power can and can't do. President Trump apparently believes his own press that we have the greatest military power in the history of the world and that all of his military decisions are correct and have all been proven a positive, which he has said in the last month or so. Because when you look at it, it's not going to. So whatever people may be thinking, whatever the polls may be saying, I promise you they will go south if he attempts to do this and it reacts and it has any kind of a response the way that I think militarily it almost has to, which is you'll take a lot of casualties, you won't accomplish anything, and you may not even be able to hold the territory. Just imagine the blowback domestically if President Trump does try this and ultimately we're either driven off the place or all killed or captured. And that's not exactly an outlandish possibility, given how difficult it will be to get people in or out, because you're not going to steam the Tripoli or the Boxer up through the Gulf of Oman, through the Strait, and then into the Persian Gulf to get all the way up to either Karga or the other island, because they'll be hammered with drones, with torpedoes, with possibly mines or anti-ship cruise missiles, all kinds of things. There's a reason why the majority of our ships right now are 700 to 1,000 miles away from those batteries, because we recognize how dangerous they are. There's a reason why nobody from Europe or Asia has volunteered their ships to escort vehicles through the Strait of Hormuz, because they all recognize that. So if you then say, even though I can't go in the ship, I'm going to try in the air, and that fails, you're screwed, because you can't rescue them through the sea, because we're not going to have that. And if you think, then we'll take that island in the Horseshoe Bend, I think it's called Kazim or something to that effect. That has just as much difficulty as anything else. And even that, to get to that island, you still have to go up through the whole, what I call gauntlet of death on the Iranian side, like 300 or 400 miles of shoreline. And of course, they have all kinds of short, medium, and long range missiles that can range it from anywhere in their country. It's not even just the shoreline, it's all the way back through it. And that's not even talking about the drone boats, the speed boats they have with anti-ship missiles. I mean, there's so many things that they could bring to bear, plus torpedoes, plus small submarines. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Militarily, it's nearly an impossible task. And I just don't know why anybody, whether in the Pentagon or the White House, thinks this is a good idea.
Well, you mentioned Clausewitz, and as he said, war is but politics by other means. And I want to ask you a little bit about the political side of this, because one thing that I thought was quite interesting pointed out to me was that Vance, up until now, I don't know if something's changed, he was relatively mute. He's obviously pretty, hey, let's go for it. But in this regard, he's obviously not a big fan of it. And a lot of speculation always comes to, is he going to be the inheritor of the MAGA movement? Him versus Rubio for the 28. Yeah. So what do you think's going on inside MAGA, inside the administration? Because there's clearly a big division within the administration, let alone the MAGA movement itself.
Well, there's lots of reporting that not just J.D. Vance, but Tulsi Gabbard was also adamantly opposed to this and apparently had been trying to push back, but it appeared that they got sidelined for all of this and pushed to the side and not listened to anymore. And I think that's one of the reasons you saw J.D. Vance go silent, because I guess his conscience, he's like, I can't give the full rah-rah thing to something that I believe is going to be disaster, because if he does have any hopes for 28, he can't be seen as this rah-rah thing. If it goes bad, if it works as he thinks, then it doesn't matter whether it was Trump or him, he'll be blamed just as much. But if he tries to put a little distance, he may be able to plausibly claim in the future, well, I was pushing back and I tried to, but he didn't listen to me. But if I'd have been president, whatever. So I suspect something like that's going on. But again, from an inside source I have inside the administration, They say that the President Trump has now shielded himself from anybody who tells him anything that he doesn't want to hear. And I don't know who those gatekeepers are, but you certainly see a lot of them on television. Jack Keane is one of them. Lindsey Graham is definitely one of them. Senator Cruz actually bragged just 2 or 3 days ago. He talked Trump into this war. He thinks it's a grand idea and we should do more of it. So if those are the people that are around, and President Trump, by his own words, said it was Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were the ones that he talked to about deciding whether or not to go to war. That tells you all you need to know right there, because they don't know squat about military operations or military history or diplomacy. They only know about transactional business deals. And if that's who he's listening to by his own account, and he's not listening to, he didn't say the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he didn't say the CIA director, didn't say Tulsi Gabbard, or Admiral Cooper. Those should have been the top 4 that he listened to. And instead, it's 2 people that are close to him. So that gives credibility to the claim that he has blocked out people who don't tell him what he wants to hear, and that is a really dangerous place to be.
Why, it's insane. I mean, I hadn't heard of that. I wrote this down also, though, because what you said earlier in our conversation reminds me of what Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said earlier today, that the US would effectively cede control of the Strait of Hormuz if the US decides to end the Iran war now or call a ceasefire, because I'm pretty certain that Israel will continue operations regardless of what the Americans do. What do you think about Mattis's comments? Do you think that they would effectively cede control to the Iranians?
The cede control means we have it now and we would lose it. We don't have it. By plunging into this war of choice, we have handed leverage into the hands of Iran that they never had and would never have had before. The idea that they would initiate and unilaterally seize the Strait of Hormuz without any kind of an attack was clearly not going to be the case, because they needed the thing open for their own oil and they wanted to have normal relations. They'd always been trying to improve relations. You saw that the Chinese were helping Saudi Arabia and Iran. They were trying to reconcile for, the better part of the last year or so. So they would never have done this. But now then, because Trump went in, that's the only thing they have. That's the one piece of leverage they have that can actually hold the superpower at bay, and that is control of the Hormuz, which they signaled ahead of time. So by starting this war, we now forced them into a position to where they exert the one bit of leverage over us that we can't militarily stop, because there is so many ways they can keep that strait shut down. I mean, you have to literally obliterate the country and all of its military capacity and all of its leadership so that there's no one left from any of these other 31 districts, all these disjointed things that they have, decentralized rather, and that's militarily impossible. So now then they have effective control over it, and they know it, and that's why they're saying, yeah, we'll talk to you. CNN was reporting just this afternoon that apparently some in the Iranian side says, yes, we are willing to talk to the Americans on our terms, which of course are reparations, security guarantees, and the withdrawal of the Americans from the region. Other than that, we can just talk about everybody being happy together. And they know that that's a bridge too far, 2 or 3 bridges too far for Trump, because he just doesn't have it in his DNA to accept military defeat, to accept responsibility for anything. So they know that that's not going to happen. So I think that the Iranian side has said, we're in this for the long term. We think we can suck down enough bombs from the U.S. if we have to go years. And they have history doing that with the Iran-Iraq war for 8 years, which the U.S. was helping Iraq against them. And they suffered egregiously, economically, hundreds of thousands killed, scores of leaders assassinated over the period of time, incredible damage done to their cities, et cetera. So they have endured it before. And by all accounts, they're prepared to do it again. And I think that they can last a lot longer than President Trump can with all of our power and everything else. If you can't force open the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore that economic lifeblood of the price of a barrel of oil starts going north, and you can't manufacture ways to drop it like he just did on Monday, that works for a period of time. But if it doesn't open after Friday, then you're going to have some more problems. And if you try to do something on this, I'm telling you, as bad as a military defeat it would be if we try to do something on the ground here, if it goes south, then that will cause the price of oil to go even higher, because now it's going to be evident that you don't have the power to force it open. And now what power you had has been shown as being much weaker than you think. And so the confidence in America and in the military also is going to take a hit. This is a major, major gamble if he does something on the ground here.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, really, that he, despite everything that he's claimed about being the peace president or peacemaker and the forever wars being ended, he's initiated one of the biggest consequential ones of modern times. My question for you now is also thinking about, what does this mean for the GCC countries, for the Europeans? Before we came on air, I saw an update from one account talking about the British are going to lead a Hormuz coalition. The UK government seems to really love their coalitions, the coalition of the willing, the Hormuz coalition. So apparently they're going to lead on this effort to provide demining equipment in the Strait, along with the French and to an extent the Americans. Why? I'm not assuming you know British operational procedures. If you do, by all means, I love your thoughts. But why would they suddenly be agreeing to this? And what do you think of the Allies' partners' response so far in this war?
Well, I mean, you've seen from the beginning where Keir Starmer said you're not going to use our bases for your operations here, and then the allegations that Diego Garcia was attacked, and I can't remember where the other one was, and so now it's like, well, you know what? We'll provide some defensive help here, but we're not going to send any ships in. We're not going to participate in the war. Now, I hadn't seen this, so I can't comment on it directly. But now, if they're thinking about doing some demining, well, look, that if the war's over, terrific, then that's useful. That can come in and help and clean those mines up, because that'll be a hard task. But you're not going to demine anything if the war is still going on, because whatever a demining ship you have come in, it'll be taken under fire and sank or set on fire. So I don't know why you're thinking that's something that you want to do. It's great that you want to have this coalition, but you much need diplomacy to bring the political part of the war to an end. As you mentioned a minute ago about Clausewitz's politics by other means, you got to get the other means taken care of before you can back off and get the military means off the table. Otherwise, this is just going to continue on. So whatever the Allies are thinking that they're going to do militarily, there's no doubt that they're coming under enormous pressure from Trump. They definitely want them in there, and he's been mocking them in open, Truth Social, etc., trying to shame them into coming in. And it sounds to me like they're trying to be a little bit pregnant. They're like, well, we'll help and have this coalition of the Hormuz or whatever it was called to make it look like we're doing something. But I promise you, Keir Starmer does not want to see a ship in the Royal Navy going to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. That won't play well at home. So I think he'll avoid that at all contexts. But he also doesn't want to make Trump angry, because they also are worrying about the Ukraine-Russia war. That's still really higher on their list. They're a lot more worried about that than I think that they were about this war of choice in the Persian Gulf. I think they feel that is a big distraction, because it is definitely having negative impacts hugely for the Russia-Ukraine war, because Russia is now much more flush with cash than they were before, and the Ukraine side is much less flush with air defense missiles, because we don't have any to give to them anymore, because we're running out of what we have. So that's having negative implications there. So the Europeans don't want to make Trump too mad where he literally stops doing anything to help out. But it's all just chasing your tail, because none of it's going to succeed until President Trump decides to stop making choices that are bad for everybody.
I like yourself, speak to a lot of varying people of perspectives, opinions, and those who are pro-Israel or from the Israeli side, IDF personnel or something like that. Their argument is that we simply have to do enough physical damage to military assets, infrastructure, command and control, supply chains, because that will cause enough psychological destruction on the IRGC's front, and also mainly target their production facilities, take out their ability to retaliate and hit Israel specifically with whatever it is, missile barrages or drone swarms. I'm still skeptical of that, because clearly the Iranians have been prepared for this. Why would they just keep all their stuff out in the open? Or do you think there is some truth to that? If they
that's what this is one of the worst almost cancers that afflicts the Western thinking these days. That's what we want to be true. And so we just say it with enough gumption and enough conviction, and we just think it will become true. But any kind of sober analysis especially of the Iranian people themselves, when they have an 8-year history to look at where they were mercilessly bombarded and lost hundreds of thousands and never did buckle the way that they're saying. And that's with an army on their border that at one point got, I think, 75 miles inside the country of Iran, and they didn't buckle. Or look at the Palestinians, or look at the Lebanese and the Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon, or look at the Houthis after a decade of war from from Saudi Arabia, etc. Everywhere you look, and again, I'll say the British, the Germans, the Japanese, it never works. And so the idea that this time it will work when it never has before, and you can't tell me, this is the problem with those claims. They never do the operational stuff. Okay, if I blow up enough stuff, then it's going to cause them to give up. Based on what? How much stuff can you blow up? And it's used to strike all these targets that are above ground. And as you properly mentioned here, because Iran realized what the threat is, that they have spent literal decades, plural, building these massive underground facilities, whole cities, to include the production, because they know that anything that can be seen from the air can be blown up. So they moved it all underground along with the feedstocks and everything else to keep going with production, and they've done it. And now that we're seeing the results of this. So they don't rely on external silos or on launchers that are outside that can all be found and targeted and destroyed. They do use new things like with the drones, etc. So you're not going to bomb them into submission because you can't reach them. You don't have enough air defense capabilities to get rid of the missiles they got coming back. So all the while you're trying to find them, they're still targeting you. And the just people in the culture of Iran, they're already inured for this. They have already proven that they can't. So you've got to tell me, these people are making those statements. How are you going to say that all of these other people groups throughout time over the last century or so, to include in the current phase here, why has it never worked there? And why do you suppose in a country of this size, when they're already prepared for it mentally as well as physically, that it's going to work now? And you're gambling everything on it.
What would you advise? What would you be saying to the Trump administration in this situation? We need to get the hell out, and if so, how? And how do we do that in a way that doesn't make it look incredibly embarrassing? What would you say without my loading?
No, that's fair. That is that's a totally fair question, because we are in it. So it doesn't matter whether we should have been. I, of course, was lobbying heavily in the month before, don't do this thing, because so many of these problems that we have were predictable, but we did. We chose to have this war. Now the question is, how do we reasonably get out of it? There is no way to get out of it without embarrassment. That doesn't exist. There's not a good way out. Now that it's going to be bad, because we have crossed a Rubicon by giving Iran their, if not motivation, the near requirement to respond by taking the only leverage they could get by taking control of the Gulf of Hormuz. They now have a demonstrated capability that if anything happens in the future, they can do the same thing again. And now there's been precedent set. So that's going to cause some friction in the region for a long time to come. And if under any circumstances the United States withdraws from this militarily, and the current Islamic regime that was in charge under the Ayatollah is still in charge on the backside of this, so many in both Israel and a whole slew of people in the United States will say, oh, this was a terrible mistake, that you've shown weakness and all this kind of stuff. Here's the thing that we need to understand. There is no military solution to this. Ergo, Trump can't say, well, let's double down on it. Let's do something more. Let's bring some more firepower in, and that will give us a win, because it's not going to. Therefore, the only logical thing you can do is eat whatever crow, be humiliated, eat whatever humble pie you need to, and get out of here with the least damage done now. You can't get out without some damage done, because we baked it in by the attack itself. By choosing this war, there's no good way out to come out of this. So Iran is going to come out stronger than they were, no matter how many bombs they've eaten, no matter how many people have been killed. They will come out of this stronger than they were before, because now they're in a more dominant position and they have more leverage that they didn't have before now than they do. So the President Trump should under no circumstances make this worse by trying a ground operation of any kind, because we don't have the resources to even theoretically bring them to their knees. All we can do is lose more troops and make the matters worse. So what we should do then, don't do that, and instead come up with whatever face-saving way you want to try to do. And in a worst-case scenario, say, all right, well, we've harmed you enough, and we've caused enough damage to your Navy, to your Air Force. We're now going to withdraw, and we're going to stop fighting, and you do whatever you want to do. But if you attack again, we're going to come back, something like that. and then we could walk away. And then that leaves it up to Iran. They may not like it, then they're probably not going to, quote, give up control of that strait. And that is the problem, is that even the so-called taco that Trump is sometimes alleged to do it, even if he tries to do what I just suggested there, the Iranian side may say, not good enough. We want some security guarantees and we want reparations, or we're going to keep hold of the strait. And we're still not going to let any of your people go through. And anybody that does is going to pay in Chinese yuan. So if you want to change that, then you're going to need to eat a lot of humble pie. I don't see a good way out of this at this point. I just see a lot of worse ways to deepen our problems.
Quite the precarious point to end on there, Colonel Daniel Davis, but that means we'll just have to have you back for another live stream. Thank you so much for your time today. Everyone watching, if you enjoyed it, then do obviously subscribe to myself and the Colonel's channels if you haven't already, and be sure to join us next time when we talk about this, hopefully in a much better position, but we'll see you soon. Take care.